Hello, Twig. We've made it through Christmas, and we made it into the new year, and now here we are in this beautiful season of January, Epiphany. And in Epiphany, we begin with John the Baptist, baptizing Jesus in the Jordan River. You know, this is an interesting moment. It's intriguing because Jesus was born, there's a lot around that story, and then there's this big gap until he's around 30 years old that we don't know what happened all those years. But here, one day, Jesus shows up at the Jordan River and says to John the Baptist, I want to be baptized by you. Now, this is interesting. John the Baptist and Jesus, of course, are cousins because their moms were cousins, but they've never met. In John 1:33, John says, I don't even know who this is. I myself do not know him. The only way John the Baptist knows Jesus is because God indicates to John that Jesus is the Messiah by the Spirit descending on him. So they meet in the river. And when John is there and Jesus says, hey, I want to be baptized, what does John do? He says no. He tries to deter Jesus from this. This is very interesting, and maybe you can relate to this because not in the same way of coming to us directly and asking us to baptize him, but Jesus does give us prompts, or in his teaching gives us guidance and says, hey, love your neighbor. And it's hard to love difficult people sometime. Or God says, prompts us to forgive someone who isn't actually asking to be forgiven. Or to show kindness toward somebody who isn't easy to show kindness toward. Right? We have our own way. We resist Jesus. So, John the Baptist resists Jesus. And he had his own reasons. I mean, I think first John was like, I am unworthy. You should be baptizing me, not me baptizing you. Right? He feels unworthy. But also, for John, it doesn't fit into his framework of thinking and how he understands this all to work. John is baptizing people who are coming out to repent and to return to God. And John says, Jesus, you don't need to do that. You don't need to repent. You are not coming back in that same way. So this isn't for you. And yet, it is. It is for Jesus to participate in. For Jesus to say to him, hey, John, right now, let's do this. It is good and right and proper and to fulfill all righteousness for us to do this. Because Jesus is not this set apart, different, other. Jesus is one of us. And by being baptized, it's just the next step of Jesus leaving heaven and all the glory of heaven to come to earth, to take on humanity, and now to be like all the other people, to be baptized. To do this humbling thing of saying, I will go down under the water, I will come back up, I will stand here and be wet. That humble thing. Jesus said, I'm going to do it because I am one of you. Right? Well, when we come to our own reasons for resisting Jesus, I don't think they're quite as thoughtful as John's were. I mean, my own reasons to resist Jesus and those prompts to love or to forgive are usually more self-oriented. You know, like, this is not my preference. Or, this person I'm judgmental toward, I don't want to give them my forgiveness. Or, like John the Baptist, I feel unworthy. If I'm not feeling good about myself, how can I then give to others the grace that God is offering? So we have our own reasons that we resist. But John, he has Jesus standing before him to convince him. To say, hey, John, let's do this right now. And John consented. Think about that word for a little bit. John consented. You know, at first he disagreed. He's like, no, this isn't the way it should be. But then he consented. He agreed, and he did it. And that was the opportunity then for the heavens to open and a dove to fall down on Jesus and a voice to say, this is my son who I love. Right? Like John consenting opened up those things. And to consent, that takes something from us in our attitude, a shift away from maybe the way we think or the other things in our life, and to go along with what God has put in our life. Now, it's not to say that these things are wonderful and we want them, and they shouldn't be, in a sense, resisted and fought through, but there's an attitude of consent where we say, okay, God, you put this in my life. You're asking me to do this. I will consent to do it. And sure, it might be your job where you say, okay, this isn't my favorite job, not my favorite boss, or not very fulfilling, but I consent to be here today, to do this work, to do my best, and to work hard. Or maybe you've got a health diagnosis, and think about that. You do not want that. That is not good, but it is what is in your life right now. And to say, I consent to having this in my life and to doing all the things to fight against that diagnosis and to get healthy again. And another way, you think about the prayers that you've been praying all the time and God has not responded. The unanswered prayers, perhaps when you've been asking for something and God has not given it. Or you've been asking to have something taken away and it's still in your life. Can you continue to pray those prayers with a consent to say, God, your will be done. If this is what I have, I will have it and I will work through it. And I will have an attitude of consent to you, God. It is an interesting thing to think about consent because this is perhaps beyond our own ability. This is perhaps impossible to do. These hard and difficult things are not things we naturally consent and say yes to. But what is it that God has given us in his grace? To given us the opportunity to say, yes, God, this is my reality that you have put me in, and I will do my best to be with you in it. So, if this feels impossible to you today, I invite you to bring that to God and say, God, how can I live with an attitude of consent to you today? All right, thanks for being with us today, and we'll see you next time.